For 30 years, Colonel Rita Stone told the same story at veteran reunions, how she had single-handedly held off an entire enemy battalion for 6 hours, how she had called in airstrikes on her own position, how she had saved 300 American soldiers from certain death. Everyone smiled politely and assumed she was just another old soldier embellishing war stories. Then last week, declassified satellite footage from 1991 was released, and everything changed. The story always began the same way. February 23, 1991. During Operation Desert Storm, Lieutenant Rita Stone, a 25-year-old forward observer, was assigned to Hill 3094, a strategic outpost overlooking the main supply route that coalition forces needed to advance toward Kuwait City. Rita would describe the morning in precise detail that never varied, no matter how many times she told the story. The temperature was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility was limited by sandstorms that had been raging for 3 days. Her unit consisted of 12 soldiers responsible for directing artillery fire and coordinating air support for the advancing coalition forces. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? Please subscribe and support us for more stories. The hill itself was unremarkable by military standards. A rocky outcropping barely 200 feet above the surrounding desert, topped with a hastily constructed observation post and communication equipment that allowed Rita's team to maintain contact with headquarters 20 miles away. The position offered excellent visibility when weather conditions permitted, but it was also dangerously exposed to enemy fire from multiple directions. Rita's commanding officer, Captain Marcus Webb, had assured her that Hill 3094 was secure. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces had withdrawn from the area 48 hours earlier, retreating toward prepared defensive positions closer to Kuwait City. The observation post was considered a low-risk assignment, perfect for a junior officer who was gaining experience in coordinating combined arms operations. But Rita's story took a dramatic turn that made veteran listeners exchange skeptical glances. She claimed that at 0630 hours, her radio operator had intercepted communications indicating that a full enemy battalion was moving toward their position. Not a patrol or reconnaissance unit, but 400 heavily armed soldiers with armored vehicles and artillery support. According to Rita, Captain Webb had dismissed the intercepted communications as misidentified friendly forces. Coalition units were advancing on multiple fronts, and radio traffic was often confusing due to the volume of simultaneous operations. Webb had ordered Rita to maintain her position and continue directing artillery fire for the main advance, despite her insistence that enemy forces were approaching. The part of Rita's story that drew the most skeptical reactions was her claim that she had been abandoned on Hill 3094 when her unit was ordered to withdraw. She insisted that Captain Webb had received evacuation orders at 0800 hours but had failed to include Rita's forward observer team in the withdrawal. According to her account, 11 soldiers had departed in 2 vehicles, leaving Rita alone with radio equipment and enough ammunition to last perhaps 30 minutes in a serious firefight. Rita would describe watching her unit's vehicles disappear into the sandstorm while enemy forces approached from 3 directions. She claimed to have used her radio to request immediate extraction, only to be told that no helicopters were available and that ground forces were too far away to provide assistance. Her only option was to abandon the observation post and attempt to reach friendly lines on foot across 20 miles of desert. But Rita's story became truly unbelievable when she described her decision to remain at the observation post instead of attempting to escape. She claimed that the approaching enemy battalion was positioning itself to attack a coalition supply convoy that was scheduled to pass through the valley below Hill 30. The convoy included 300 soldiers, medical personnel, and critical supplies needed for the continued advance toward Kuwait City. According to Rita, she had radioed headquarters to warn them about the enemy ambush, but her reports were dismissed as the confused observations of an isolated soldier under stress. Communication difficulties caused by the sandstorm made it impossible to verify her claims, and command authorities were focused on larger operations that were already underway. Rita insisted that she had made a conscious decision to remain at the observation post and defend it single-handedly rather than allow the enemy battalion to establish positions that would enable them to destroy the approaching convoy. Her plan was to use the radio equipment to direct artillery and air support against the enemy forces, even though doing so would certainly reveal her position and draw enemy fire. The battle Rita described was so one-sided and desperate that it sounded like something from a Hollywood action movie. She claimed to have used sniper techniques to eliminate enemy scouts who were advancing toward the observation post, picking off targets at ranges that seemed impossible for standard military rifles. Her descriptions of precision shooting under extreme conditions made experienced marksmen shake their heads in disbelief. But the centerpiece of Rita's story was her claim that she had deliberately called in artillery strikes on her own position when enemy forces began overrunning the hill. She described radioing coordinates that would place high-explosive shells within 50 meters of her location, using the confusion caused by friendly fire to break up enemy formations and force them to seek cover. Rita would explain that she had survived the artillery barrage by taking shelter in a reinforced bunker that had been constructed as part of the observation post. The bunker's protection was limited, but it was sufficient to shield her from shrapnel and blast effects as long as the incoming rounds didn't score direct hits. She claimed to have endured 6 separate artillery barrages over the course of 4 hours, each one called in on her own position to disrupt enemy attacks. The most dramatic part of Rita's story involved her final radio transmission, which she claimed had lasted 47 minutes and had been recorded by multiple radio operators at headquarters. According to her account, she had provided a continuous narrative of enemy movements, target coordinates, and damage assessments while under direct enemy fire. Her transmission had enabled artillery and air support units to coordinate a devastating counterattack that eliminated the entire enemy battalion. Rita described the arrival of coalition helicopter gunships that had been vectored to her position based on the target information she had provided. She claimed to have guided the helicopters through multiple attack runs that destroyed enemy vehicles and scattered the surviving soldiers across the desert. The enemy battalion that had threatened the supply convoy was eliminated as an effective fighting force within 30 minutes of the air attack. But when Rita concluded her story by describing her rescue from Hill 3094, veteran listeners found it impossible to believe. She claimed that when coalition ground forces finally reached her position, they found evidence of a massive battle that had lasted 6 hours. Enemy casualties were estimated at over 200, with dozens of destroyed vehicles and equipment scattered across the hill and surrounding desert. Rita insisted that her actions had saved 300 American soldiers who would have been killed or wounded if the enemy ambush had succeeded. The supply convoy had passed through the valley safely because the enemy battalion had been eliminated before it could establish attack positions. Her 6 hours of single-handed defense had changed the outcome of a significant military operation. But there was no official record of the battle. Rita described, "Military historians could find no documentation of enemy casualties on Hill 3094, no reports of artillery strikes called in by a single forward observer, and no mention of a coalition supply convoy that had been saved from ambush." Rita's story existed only in her own memory and in the skeptical recollections of veterans who had heard her tell it dozens of times. The official after-action report for February 23, 1991, described Hill 3094 as having been evacuated without incident when coalition forces advanced toward Kuwait City. Lieutenant Rita Stone was listed as having been temporarily separated from her unit due to communication difficulties, but was recovered without injury or enemy contact. The report made no mention of combat operations, enemy casualties, or heroic actions under fire. Rita's commanding officer, Captain Webb, had filed a supplementary report describing Rita as having become disoriented and confused during the evacuation from Hill 3. His account suggested that Rita had remained at the observation post due to misunderstood orders and had been found by rescue teams in a state of combat stress that required immediate medical evaluation. The medical evaluation that followed Rita's rescue had diagnosed her with acute stress reaction and possible memory distortion related to combat trauma. Military psychiatrists had concluded that her detailed recollections of the battle were fantasy responses to overwhelming stress and had recommended counseling to help her process the reality of what had actually happened. Rita's insistence on the accuracy of her story had been interpreted as evidence of psychological denial, a common response among soldiers who had difficulty accepting that they had not performed heroically under fire. Her detailed knowledge of military procedures and tactical operations was attributed to her training rather than to actual combat experience. The discrepancy between Rita's story and the official record had followed her throughout her military career. Despite her technical competence and leadership abilities, she had been passed over for promotions and excluded from prestigious assignments. Her fellow officers remained polite, but skeptical whenever she mentioned her experiences on Hill. Rita's persistence in telling her story had made her something of a legend among veterans, but not the kind of legend she had hoped to become. She was known as Tall Tale Rita, the veteran who told impossible stories about battles that had never happened. Her detailed accounts were seen as harmless fantasies that helped her cope with the disappointment of an unremarkable military career. At veteran reunions and military ceremonies, Rita would inevitably find herself surrounded by polite listeners who had heard her story before, but were too courteous to interrupt or challenge her directly. Younger veterans would exchange knowing looks, while older soldiers would nod sympathetically and change the subject as soon as possible. Rita's family had grown tired of hearing the same story repeated at every gathering. Her children had learned to make excuses when military events were scheduled, avoiding situations where their mother might embarrass herself by retelling her impossible tale. Her grandchildren had been warned not to ask Grandma Rita about her war experiences because it would trigger another recitation of events that had obviously never happened. But Rita never stopped believing in the truth of her story. She had requested access to classified records, filed appeals with military historians, and contacted journalists who might be interested in investigating her claims. Every inquiry had been politely declined or dismissed based on the obvious impossibility of one soldier accomplishing what Rita claimed to have done. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The National Security Agency had been digitizing and declassifying satellite imagery from Operation Desert Storm as part of a historical preservation project. Advances in digital enhancement technology had made it possible to extract details from satellite photos that had been invisible when the images were first captured 30 years earlier. Dr. Michael Harrison, a military historian at the National Defense University, had been analyzing the newly enhanced satellite imagery when he noticed anomalies in photographs taken over Hill 30. The images showed evidence of extensive combat activity that contradicted the official record of the location having been evacuated without incident. Digital enhancement revealed crater patterns consistent with artillery impacts, burn marks indicating vehicle fires, and debris fields suggesting that a significant battle had taken place. The satellite images captured sequential photographs taken at 30-minute intervals throughout the day, creating a time-lapse record of events that had been invisible to previous analysis. Dr. Harrison's initial assumption was that the satellite images had been mislabeled or that the combat activity had taken place at a different location. But GPS coordinates confirmed that the battle damage was definitely located on Hill 39-4, and the timestamps matched the date when Lieutenant Rita Stone claimed to have fought her impossible battle. Further analysis revealed details that corroborated specific elements of Rita's story. Thermal imaging showed the heat signatures of multiple vehicle fires that had occurred between 1,000 and 1,600 hours on February. Impact analysis identified at least 47 separate artillery strikes that had occurred in the immediate vicinity of the observation post. Most significantly, the satellite images captured what appeared to be a single heat signature remaining in the area of the observation post throughout the entire period of combat activity. The signature was consistent with one person who had remained stationary for extended periods but had occasionally moved between different positions on the hill. The enhanced satellite imagery also revealed the movements of what appeared to be a large military formation approaching Hill 39-4 from 3 directions during the early morning hours. The formation's size and disposition were consistent with a battalion-strength unit equipped with vehicles and heavy weapons. Dr. Harrison had compared the satellite evidence with Rita's detailed account and found remarkable correlation between her descriptions and the objective record captured from space. The timing of artillery strikes, the locations of vehicle fires, and the patterns of enemy movement all matched Rita's story with precision that would have been impossible to fabricate. The revelation that satellite evidence supported Rita's claims had prompted a comprehensive review of the official records from February. Military investigators discovered that communication logs from that day had been classified and archived separately from the main operational records, creating gaps in the documentary evidence that had been available to previous researchers. When the communication logs were declassified and analyzed, they revealed radio transmissions that matched Rita's description of her 47-minute final broadcast. Multiple radio operators had recorded fragments of transmissions from Hill 3094 that included target coordinates, damage assessments, and requests for artillery support. The radio logs also contained recordings of Rita's voice providing continuous updates on enemy positions and movements while under fire. The quality of the recordings was poor due to atmospheric interference and combat noise, but voice analysis confirmed that the transmissions had originated from the Hill 3094 observation post during the time period Rita had claimed. Further investigation revealed that the official after-action report had been deliberately altered to remove references to the battle on Hill. The original report had documented heavy enemy casualties and had credited Lieutenant Stone with exceptional courage under fire and tactical brilliance that prevented significant coalition losses. The altered report had been created as part of a classified operation to conceal the true strategic situation during Operation Desert Storm. Intelligence analysts had determined that publicizing Rita's battle would reveal weaknesses in coalition intelligence that could be exploited by enemy forces in future operations. Rita's heroic actions had been covered up, not because they hadn't happened, but because they had revealed operational security failures that could endanger other military personnel. Her story had been suppressed to protect classified information about coalition vulnerabilities and enemy capabilities. The cover-up had been so thorough that even Rita's commanding officer, Captain Webb, had been required to file false reports, minimizing the significance of events on Hill. Webb's description of Rita as disoriented and confused had been written to support the official narrative that nothing significant had happened. Dr. Harrison's analysis had vindicated every detail of Rita's 30-year campaign to have her story recognized as historical fact. The satellite evidence proved that she had indeed fought a 6-hour battle against overwhelming odds, called in artillery strikes on her own position, and saved 300 coalition soldiers from ambush. The declassification of Rita's true service record revealed a level of heroism that exceeded even her own descriptions. Intelligence analysts had concluded that her actions on Hill 3094 represented one of the most extraordinary individual combat performances in modern military history. Rita's technical skill in coordinating artillery and air support while under direct enemy fire had been described by analysts as tactically perfect and strategically decisive. Her ability to maintain effective communication while defending a fixed position against battalion-strength attack had been studied as an example of exceptional battlefield leadership. The enemy battalion that Rita had defeated single-handedly had been identified as an elite unit that had been specifically tasked with disrupting coalition supply lines. Intelligence reports indicated that the unit's success in ambushing the coalition convoy could have delayed the advance toward Kuwait City by several days and resulted in significant coalition casualties. Rita's prevention of the ambush had been recognized in classified assessments as a turning point that had enabled the rapid conclusion of Operation Desert Storm. Her 6 hours of combat had contributed directly to the coalition's ability to achieve decisive victory with minimal casualties. The medals and commendations that Rita had earned for her actions on Hill 3094 had been classified along with the rest of the operation's records. Her official service record had been sanitized to remove any reference to classified operations that might compromise ongoing intelligence activities. But the declassification of satellite evidence had made it possible to recognize Rita's achievements publicly for the first time in 30 years. The Pentagon had announced plans to award her the Medal of Honor for her actions on Hill 3094, making her one of the few living recipients of the nation's highest military decoration. The announcement of Rita's recognition had prompted a reevaluation of the way military historians assess combat reports that seemed too extraordinary to believe. Harrison's analysis had demonstrated that advanced technology could reveal evidence that had been invisible to previous generations of researchers. Rita's vindication had also highlighted the human cost of necessary military secrecy. Her 30 years of being dismissed as a fantasist had been the price of protecting classified information that could have endangered other soldiers if it had been revealed prematurely. The veterans who had politely endured Rita's tall tales for 3 decades had found themselves confronting the reality that they had been dismissing genuine heroism as impossible fiction. Her story had seemed too extraordinary to believe because it was more extraordinary than most people could imagine. Rita's family had struggled to reconcile their understanding of their mother and grandmother with the reality of her genuine war hero status. The woman they had seen as an embarrassing fantasist was actually one of the most decorated combat veterans of her generation. The satellite footage that had vindicated Rita's claims had been enhanced using artificial intelligence techniques that were not available when the images were first captured. The technology that proved her story was more advanced than the technology that had been used to cover it up. Rita Stone's 30-year struggle to have her story believed had become a reminder that truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, and that the most incredible stories are sometimes the most accurate. Her persistence in the face of universal skepticism had ultimately been rewarded with complete vindication. The declassified satellite footage that had changed everything was now being studied by military historians as an example of how technological advances can reveal hidden truths about historical events. Rita's battle on Hill 3094 had been recorded from space with precision that exceeded any human observer's ability to document events in real time. For 30 years, Colonel Rita Stone had told the same story at veteran reunions, knowing that everyone thought she was embellishing war stories. But Rita hadn't been telling war stories. She had been reporting history that had been classified for 3 decades. The satellite footage had proved everything, and Rita Stone was finally recognized as the hero she had always been. Nobody believed her war stories until satellite footage proved that every impossible detail had actually happened. Rita Stone's vindication demonstrated that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the most true, and that heroes are sometimes forced to wait decades for their heroism to be recognized. The woman who had been known as Tall Tale Rita was now Colonel Rita Stone, Medal of Honor recipient, and her story had become proof that truth really can be stranger than fiction. The satellite footage had changed everything, and Rita Stone's impossible war story had finally been revealed as historical fact.